The name of the talk is Rethinking Education, and I have 3 books: Rethinking Fairness in Education, Rethinking Funding in Education, and Rethinking Fun in Education, all starting with F. And so this it combines those. So it's going to be, briefly, I'm going to go through the main idea in each of those books and then tie it together with an example of what I mean when I talk about asking the right question. So normally I would have slides for you to look at. We don't have those. So normally I think there are 3 things. I'm going to assume that what we want, what we're working towards, is a reasonably functional public school system. I know there are a lot of people who'd be like, just get rid of it. And yet, if it has to exist, if it's going to be there, could it be reasonably functional? Could it pretty much do what it should do at, a reasonable cost? And so I think that's possible if we stop doing 3 things. And the first one is we have to stop thinking that fairness is about money, because that is just derailing everything. You just start talking about money and you never get to the real questions. The second thing we need to stop doing is to stop using what I call the pay and pray model of school funding. And I'll talk more about that. The third thing we need to stop doing is we need to stop stuffing so many boxes under the umbrella labeled school. And I'll talk more about that. So I've noticed over time, people resist when you tell them what not to do. They're like, don't tell me what not to do, tell me what to do. And so I'm going to rephrase the things I just said in a positive way. The things we need to start doing are we need to start making the whole concept of fairness about what gets learned rather than about what gets taxed and what gets spent. The second thing is we need to start using the standard model of commerce that we use for everything else to pay for schools, or more specifically, to pay for education and to pay for learning rather than instruction. And the third thing is we have to start limiting schools to things that are mandatory and offloading everything else to somewhere else. So each of those ideas is the subject of one of those books. So we'll start with Rethinking Fairness. You all know who Andrew Valinsky is. So he's been trotting. He's the lawyer who is responsible for the Claremont travesty, in which he managed to get the state Supreme Court to completely turn Article 83 of the state constitution on its head. That's a whole book in itself. But he made a tour several years ago. He's on another tour for what he calls Fairness in School Funding. And it is all about money. He never mentions achievement. He never mentions test scores. He never mentions what's happening. All he talks about is who are we going to take money from, for what, who should we give it to? That's the entire thing, and he makes that's his definition of fairness, that there's some set of tax rates, there's some set of things, some combination of incomes and property and, body parts, whatever it is, that if we tax those the right way, that will be fair. And so what I would show you at this point are 3 graphs, which I will briefly describe by waving my hands around, which when you see them, I believe that you can't look at them and still come away, if you've understood them, thinking that money has anything to do with anything. So the first graph, some of you have seen this, it's from the Cato Institute, and it shows spending going like this, and student achievement going like this. And the spending is adjusted for inflation, so it's not just that the money, is worth less. This is actual spending, actual dollars. And they're the government's own figures. Since 1970. It goes from 1970 to 2010, something like that. And it's the government's own figures for spending. It's the government's own figures for achievement using the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP test. So he's not making anything up. He's not cherry picking. He's just, this is what happened. And so, the thing about that test is it was created by the education establishment to answer the question, how are we doing? And it shows you how they're doing. They're doing really crappy, okay? So the second graph that we like to show is this NAEP test, and it's for a particular, they test in, I think, 4th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade. They test literacy, numeracy, STEM thinking, scientific thinking, and they'll do it every year. And the point is, no matter what test you pick or what year you pick, it always looks the same. And when you graph the scores against the amount of money the state is spending on each student, it looks like this. Where you have a state over here spending $7,000 per student and a state over here spending $30,000 per student, and they're getting the same results. There's no difference. Now, when they show you these, they will, instead of showing you the whole graph, they'll show you this narrow band so it looks like some states are doing better. Oh, look, New Hampshire's on top. We're doing, Mississippi moved from 50th place to 22nd place. But it makes no difference. And the other thing is, so they make it really hard to understand what a NAEP score is. If I tell you that this state got a NAEP score of 217 on 4th grade reading, you don't know what that means. But if you look around, you can find what they would regard as the lowest acceptable score, say, a D-, and no state is there, ever. They are all below failing. So there is no such thing as better states and worse states. There are terrible states and more terrible states. The third graph is my favorite. Jody and I put it together after we saw something that Andrew Valinsky was handing around, where he had created this graph which purported to show that in the 20 years since the Claremont decision, nothing had really changed. Spending was still unfair in the same way. And so we're like, that can't be right. We looked at it and we saw there were just several ways that he actually cheated. I mean, cheated as in, like if I look at the vertical line here, the bottom tells me one town and the top is a different town. So he's comparing towns. He reduced everything to a percentage above the mean. And so really the final graph that he put out said nothing more than, oh, some towns spend more than the mean and some spend less, which is like, okay, we could have done that without the study. We would have known that. So when you extract everything and you compare apples to apples and you adjust for inflation and you have actual numbers, what you get is a graph that looks like this. Down here, you see every district, and here's what they were spending before Claremont. It was typically around $5,000 per student. And then 20 years later, adjusted for inflation, you see this. Okay, and again, you can draw a line in the middle there, and except for one district, Waterville Valley, which is kind of like Park Ave, every district 20 years later was spending more than any district was spending 20 years earlier. Every district in the state, in terms of spending, is a rich district right now. And yet, we have seen no improvement in any measurable way of academic achievement. So the point of this is that so there's a joke I like. This guy's walking, a cop is walking down the street and he sees a guy crawling around in a parking lot, and he goes over, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I lost my keys." And he's like, "Well, I'll help you look for them." So they look, and 20 minutes later, they've looked everywhere, and he says, I don't think they're here. You sure you lost them here? He's like, "Oh, no, I lost them over in the park." He's like, "Well, why are you looking for them here?" He's like, "Oh, the light's better here." Okay, and to me, this is education policy discussion. Everybody is over in the parking lot talking about money. Because we know how to talk about money. We know how to set tax rates. We know how to set spreadsheets. What's over in the park are questions like, okay, I put 20 kids in the same learning environment, and some of them learn and some don't. How come? Right? Questions like, if a kid really actually wants to learn something, can we stop him? Do we even have to help him? Or if a kid really doesn't want to learn something, can we make him? And how much would that cost, right? So the thing that I will tell people is if you take away nothing else from anything you've ever heard or read from me, it's this: money is the lamppost of education. And if you find yourself in a discussion that is supposed to be about education, but you're talking about money, you've lost, because they have dragged you back to the parking lot, and you are never going to accomplish anything. So that is so fairness, right? So there's another graph that I would show you, which looks roughly like this. So imagine there's a line here which represents the amount of stuff you have to know to have an adequate education. And you have kids who start at some age, the time goes this way, they start at some age, and they go for some number of years. And at the end of that, some of them are way, way above what anybody would call adequate, and some of them can barely read. But you know what? You're 18. Don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out. You're done. And this is the kind of fairness in learning that we get when we focus on money all the time, okay? So I'm imagining that there's a different way of thinking about fairness, which is a kid starts when he starts, whatever age that is, whatever level of readiness, he goes until he hits adequacy, and then he's done, right? Maybe that takes 12 years. Maybe he's 14 years old when it happens. Maybe he's 23. It doesn't matter. The point is every kid gets the same education, and that is a more workable, more fair, that's a more fair definition of fairness, because everybody's actually getting the same thing. And so anyways, that's, I want the point of that book is to try to change that discussion, that when people start talking about fairness, you just look, if we're talking about money, let's just stop and let's actually talk about what kids are learning and aren't learning and why that's happening and not happening. So the second book is Rethinking Funding in Education. So having told you that you shouldn't talk about money, I'm now going to talk about money, but I'm not going to talk about how much money or what we spend it on. I'm going to talk about a different aspect of money, which is when we spend it, which I think is crucial. And so I would just ask you to take a moment, think about all the things you have that you really like, you know, your watch, your car, your computer, the clothes you wear, your appliances, the gun you're wearing, right? You'll have a gun. So if you look at those things and you ask, what do they all have in common? They have nothing in common. They're all completely different, but yet they do actually have something in common. And what they have in common is not what they are, but how you paid for them. And if you think about how you paid for them, it looks like this. You specified exactly what you're going to get. I'm going to get these features. I'm going to get stuff made out of this material. It's going to have this process or whatever. So you know exactly what you're supposed to get. And step 2 is you get it. And step 3 is you pay for it. So you don't pay for it until after you've actually got what you're paying for. And there's an optional step 4, which is if something goes wrong, you know, you get your money back or they replace it or they fix it somehow, right? And there's an old joke. I like jokes. These 2 fish are swimming by and one goes, hey, the water's really nice today, right? And the other one goes, what's water? This is standard commerce, okay? And you know that you don't notice this because you can do a little thought experiment. You go to, let's say you go to Walmart, and you buy a toaster, and you go home and it doesn't work, and you come back to Walmart, and you're like, hey, the toaster doesn't work. And the guy behind the counter goes, oh, that's too bad. You want to buy another one? And you'd be like, what? That's not how this works. Are you filming me? So the standard model of commerce is sort of the answer, I think, to when people talk about accountability. They'll say, we need accountability in schools. And by that, they mean that we have to fill out certain paperwork, or teachers should take certain classes, or just certain things should happen, none of which the kids have to be there a certain amount of time, none of which has anything to do with who's actually learning what. So the thing about the standard model of commerce is accountability is baked in. If you don't get paid till you do the job, then you are by definition accountable to your customer. Right? You don't have to add anything else. You don't have to add extra paperwork, extra restrictions. It's like you do the job or you don't get paid. So in contrast, if you think about, you know, all the things that you like getting better or cheaper or both every year, schools get more expensive or worse or both every year. And so again, we can ask, well, what is going on there? What are all the, and this is for different kinds of schools. It's for charter schools. It's for, you know, public schools, it's for private schools. They're all getting crappier. They're all getting worse. And you ask, well, what do they all have in common? And what they all have in common isn't the schools themselves. It's how we pay for them. And for schools, we use what I call the pay and pray model of funding. And the way that works is we don't say what we're supposed to get. We give them a bunch of money up front. We hope for the best. And when we don't get it, we try again the next year. Right? So this is, and I look at this and I think, you know, again, people talk about that we need to add accountability to this process, but here's I think the key insight. If you get paid, whether you do anything or not, accountability isn't even a meaningful concept because The money is already lost. It's gone. You've got it. You've spent it. There's no getting it back. There's nothing to be done about it. So any talk about accountability in this pay and pray model, I think it's ridiculous. It's a red herring. It's just to get us, again, back into the parking lot. Let's talk about things that aren't meaningful. So there's a guy named Charles Kettering. He was an inventor, and he said one of my favorite things ever, which is, a problem well posed is half solved. And what he means by that is, if you ask a question or pose a problem in the right way, the very words you use, the structure you set up, the thing you're looking for, points you in the direction of the right answer. And the converse of that, of course, is if you ask the wrong question, then you're being pointed away from the right answer. Now, what can happen is you ask the wrong question, you get the right answer to the wrong question, but the thing that people forget is the right answer to the wrong question is still the wrong answer. Okay? If you've solved the wrong problem, your problem is still sitting there unaddressed, right? And so I bring this up because I think for decades, we have been asking the wrong question. We have been asking the question, what are we doing wrong in schools? And that's not a question that it gives you any hints about what the answer might be. It could be anything. I think a better question that we should start asking is, what are we doing right everywhere else? And for me, the number one thing we're doing right everywhere else is we use the standard model of commerce to pay for things. And that's what makes everything work. And so once you see that, you have to, the next natural question is, well, why don't we do that in schools? And we don't do it because people aren't demanding it. So, the point of this book is to say that until we stop paying up front for promises and good intentions and start paying after the fact for results, nothing else is going to happen. And here's the second thing I would hope that you would take away from this. I'm at the point now where when I hear somebody propose a solution to education problems, we need more charter schools, less charter schools, we need this funding, we need that funding, let's change the curriculum, let's have EFAs, let's have whatever. My first question is, are we still going to be doing pay and pray? Because if the answer is yes, then it doesn't matter. Nothing you're proposing, to me, this is like saying, well, I had this perpetual motion machine and it didn't work, but I'm going to paint it blue and now it will. Okay? If you are doing pay and pray, nothing you do will work, because nothing you do can work because you're dealing with human beings. So, the third book is called Rethinking Fun in Education. So some of you, the basic idea here came from a book I wrote called The Libertarian Case for Public Schools. And there is one, in case you're wondering. And it's based on this idea. There's a thing called the tragedy of the commons, which is an idea from Garrett Hardin. And what it means basically is when nobody owns something, it will tend to get overused. So his example was in the town commons. Here's a big grassy area. Everybody brings their cows and they graze them there. And it doesn't belong to anybody, so nobody's managing it, so it gets overgrazed and all the grass dies. In the same way, nobody owns the oceans, so they get polluted. Nobody owns the sky, so they get polluted. They get filled with whatever. So the concept I came up with is called the travesty of the umbrella, and I've already alluded to it, but the idea is this. Imagine you have this umbrella, and it's X, something X that's subsidized. And people who are getting that thing think, well, it's really nice they're giving me X, but I'd also like this thing Y. If I can make Y seem to be part of X, then I can drag it over under the umbrella, and I'll get that for free too. Okay? And so, just to have an example to think with, I like to use healthcare. Right? So let's say we're going to make healthcare subsidized. Everybody can go to the doctor for free. And so some people are going to be, well, that's nice, but I can't get to the doctor because I don't have a car. So transportation should really be subsidized as part of healthcare. My Medicare should pay for my car. And I can't go if I have to watch my kids. So daycare should be subsidized under healthcare. And if I can't afford to eat, I'm starving, then my doctor's not going to really be able to help me. So food should be subsidized as part of healthcare. And, if I can't dress myself because I don't know how to do buttons or zippers, I'm going to end up going to the doctor naked. That's not good for anybody. So occupational therapy should be part of healthcare. And, if my family fights a lot or they don't want me, they're Christian Scientists, they don't want me to go to the doctor, whatever, I may need social help, social workers to come and help me. And that should be part of healthcare. And so on and on and on. All those things should be part of healthcare, right? And I hope you're thinking, no, that would be nuts. We would never do that. It makes no sense at all. And yet, this is exactly what we do with school. So the umbrella labeled school now contains all those things. It contains social work, it contains therapy, it contains daycare, it contains transportation, it contains food. Except the thing is, there's a lot of other stuff in addition to that. There's, hobbies and team spirit and whatever. There are so many boxes that have been dragged under the umbrella labeled education or school that you can't even find the boxes that are named literacy and numeracy and rationality. Those have been shoved away. They might not even be under the umbrella anymore because there's just not enough room for them. Something has to give. And so this is, people ask, well, how come schools cost so much? And I think one of the things, why do they cost so much and perform so poorly? And I think it's because we are trying to use them for everything so they can't do anything well. There's an old Chinese saying, I think it's Chinese, if you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch either of them, right? You have to pick one and go after it. And schools are chasing dozens of things and not getting any of them. So, that would be a place to start, actually paring this stuff back. So I'm from Croydon. We had a little kerfuffle 2022. So we're not a SB2 town, we're not a city, we have a traditional district meeting for our schools. And one year, people showed up and I had placed a pamphlet by the check-in table. And they came in and they had time to read the pamphlet because everything I write is very short and I hope easy to read. And by the time time to vote came, I stood up and proposed that instead of a ransom of $1.7 million, we have a budget of $800,000. And so those of you who don't, I think you all know the difference, right? A budget is when there's a certain amount of money. It's like, here's what you have to work with. And you got to make decisions. You can't have everything you want, so you got to decide to combine some things or cut some things out or reduce some things, or you have to set priorities and make decisions. And as opposed to a ransom, which is when, I say, you're going to give me this much money, I pick the number, and if you don't give it to me, I hurt you. So we basically, instead of the district saying, give us $1.7 million or we'll take your houses, we said, hey, what if we give you $10,000 per student to work with? And that's $800,000. And the amazing thing was it actually passed, right? 24 to 14 or something. It was the same people. Anyways, it got overturned later through a lot of hijinks and fear-mongering and illegality and outside money. But there's a book about it called The Croydon Budget Battle, which exists in case I really desperately want somebody else to try the same thing, but to be ready for it. We just weren't ready for it. We had no idea the shitstorm that was going to come down as a result of this. But you can be ready for it. But the reason I bring it up is, during this whole thing, there was a period where people were trying to come to grips with the idea that they had $800,000 to work with, and they had to make some decisions. And so Jody, my wife, she was the chair of the school board, and she kept asking parents, okay, we can't do everything. What are your priorities? What should we focus on, and what can we let slide academically? And she wouldn't get any answers. All people wanted to talk about, well, are you going to pick my kids up in the morning and drop them off? Are they going to be able to be with their friends? Will they be able to do the things they like welding and band and drama? It's and we were just incredulous, just tearing at our hair, just thinking, this can't be happening. And finally, better late than never, I had an epiphany one day, and it was like, oh my God, they were telling us something really important and really fundamental. And what they were telling us was, they didn't actually want a school. They wanted a community center. And so I started thinking, but this book is basically about asking that question, saying, well, what if that's what we gave them instead? What would that do to schools? So the state Supreme Court in the Claremont decision, took Article 83 of the state constitution and literally turned it on its head, taking something that said, that it's the state's job to protect you from monopolies that undermine the inherent and essential right to free and fair competition in the trades and industries. And, oh, by the way, you have to treat seminaries and public schools the same. It took this and turned it into something saying, screw seminaries, but for public schools, the state needs to fund, operate, and regulate them as a monopoly, essentially. So it's like, okay, whatever. But in the middle of this, to give credit where credit is due, they tried to define what it means to have an adequate education, and their formulation was, an adequate education is one that provides each educable child with an opportunity to acquire the knowledge and learning necessary to participate intelligently in the American political, economic, and social systems of a free government. Okay, and this kind of, in a vague way, echoes the beginning of Article 83, which says the reason we want to have educated people is so we can preserve a free government. That is the game we're playing, even though that's gotten completely lost. So anyways, it would be fun and useful and instructive to have a discussion, say, about the word educable, which has never been mentioned in another court case, never been defined in a statute, never addressed by the Department of Education, but which has enormous potential for cutting, say, special education costs. We could have a very nice discussion about the word opportunity. Because if you have an internet connection and you have a computer, you have the opportunity to learn pretty much everything that anybody has ever known, with the exception of things like nuclear secrets. Although, as John Aristotle Phillips showed, you can work those out for yourself. So the word that draws my attention the most is the word necessary. So what is it? What is necessary to be part of a free government? Okay, if something is necessary, I think it makes sense to say it had better be mandatory. We cannot, if it's necessary, we cannot have people running around who can't do these things. And so, looking at that from the other direction, if something's not mandatory, it's clearly not necessary, is it? And so for those of you who are familiar with it in Harry Potter, the Harry Potter books, there's a sorting hat. So every student shows up and you put the hat on his head and it looks inside his memories and his thoughts and his hopes and fears and says, oh, you belong in this house or you belong in that house. And so I look at that definition that the state Supreme Court gave us, and to me, that's a sorting hat. And here's how it works. We take some specific kind of information, not a very nebulous thing like, oh, learn algebra or learn technology or learn history, but an actual thing like being able to identify, say, an exponential function, or being able to read a paragraph that you've never seen before and actually make some sense of it. Specific, useful, necessary things that you have to be able to do. And we put the hat on it and it goes, would we make every kid do this? And if the answer is yes, it belongs in school. And if the answer is no, it belongs somewhere else. Okay, so you can think about this. Are we going to make every kid learn to play a musical instrument? I don't think so. Imagine the parents complaining, right? Are we going to make every kid play a team sport? Are we going to make every kid learn a foreign language? Are we going to make every kid, learn calculus? No, it's not going to happen. Those are not necessary. They're nice, and some people should do all those things and know all those things, but they're not necessary for everybody to do it. And so that gives you this very, very clear line, right? And so the rest of the book is about how you might figure out where that line is and what we should do about it. So anyways, those are the books. Those are the main ideas, right? There are these three ideas. That one, that fairness is about learning, not about money. That we should pay for learning the way we pay for everything else. And that we should use schools for what everyone needs and use other institutions for what some people want. And if we did those things, I do believe we would have a chance at a reasonably functional public school system. We could still screw it up. There are lots of things that could go wrong. But it's sort of like a three-legged stool. You need all three legs of those. If you take any one of those legs out, if you try to do two of them but you do pay and pray, not going to work, If we keep everything in schools, not going to work. If we make fairness about money, not going to work, no matter what else we do. So if you forget about even one of those, it's going to undermine what you're trying to do, and that's not going to work out. And the big problem we have now, we currently have no legs on that stool. So we're just on the ground, and we're not going to reach anything no matter how hard we try. So I want to finish up by returning to Kettering's observation, and I want to show you an example of how you can start with a really bad question and end up with a question that basically gives you the answer. So we start with, if you look at what the legislature, what the Department of Education, what the courts are trying to do, they're trying to answer this question. How should government educate children? Okay? And this is just a terrible question. I mean, for one thing, we could change it to, how should society educate children? The difference being that government operates by force and society operates by persuasion. Okay? And so if you're having government do something, it's by definition political, which means people are going to fight, some people are going to win, and some people are going to lose. But when society's doing something, you have unlimited ways to help people with the kind of help they need and not the kind of help they don't need. And also, just using government is what opens up all of this to pay and pray funding, because people would not put up with that. Spending your own money, nobody's putting up with pay and pray for a minute. Just imagine going into Home Depot and going, here's $500, give me something good, right? It's just not a viable model for anything that people have to do. So the next thing is, instead of saying, how should society educate children? We can look at that and go, what if we ask, how should society avoid leaving children uneducated? That is a very different way of thinking about it in two ways. One is just the difference between educated and uneducated. People have been arguing about what educated means since Aristotle. We are not any closer to a consensus on that. But I believe there is something very close to a consensus on what it means to be uneducated. So if you can't play the tuba, not uneducated. If, you can't order in a French restaurant, not uneducated. If you can't read, yes, uneducated. If you can't do enough math to balance your life and keep track of your money and to be able to evaluate public policy decisions that you are going to be asked to vote on, yes, uneducated. And so I think a lot about the guy who wrote The Little Prince, Antoine Saint-Exupéry. He said once that perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more you can add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And so this, I think, is, if we are going to set out to say, what do we need to be teaching, as you start taking away as much as you can. And at some points, it's like literacy. Nope, we can't get rid of that. We have to keep that. And you end up with this idea of what it means to be uneducated. And you see that not as a thing that has to be done, but as almost like a disease, something to be avoided. Okay? So that's the first way in which to say, let's avoid being uneducated is different. The second is, if the idea is that we're going to give an education or educate kids, then that leads you in the direction of saying, this is a thing we have to give to people whether they need it or not. Your dad makes $1 million a year, we're still going to pay for your education, which makes absolutely no sense at all, right? Especially since the money that you're taking may be coming from somebody who has to decide each month whether they're going to pay their property taxes or eat, okay? So again, now we're at the question, how should society avoid leaving children uneducated? And there's one more change we can make, which is that question suggests it's only children who need education. But in fact, everybody needs education. There are a lot of people who are past the age of majority who still could use a healthy dose of education. So there's no special reason to focus on children unless you're doing something like trying to sneak daycare under the umbrella, okay? So we end up with this. So the last change that we would make is, instead of changing should, we say how can. So now we're saying, how can society avoid leaving people uneducated? Which suggests that there are, again, many ways to do it, not all of which have to apply to everything, to every person. And so if we ask the question this way, how can society avoid leaving people uneducated? I believe that this actually does point us in the direction of a solution. And why do I say that? I say that because we have asked the same question in this same form for things like, how can society avoid leaving people unheeded, unsheltered, unmedicated, untreated, unfed, unconnected to the internet, right? We already do this, and we don't go around and say, well, let's give everybody internet. We say, let's find the people who can't afford it, and we'll find ways to help them, right? We don't necessarily say, well, let's give everybody, we'll send everybody to the doctors we decide. We say, the people who can take care of it will take care of it. The people who can't, we will find ways to help them, okay? So we have already done this for other kinds of assistance where there are things that people need, and some people can't afford some of the things that they need. And so the question I'm basically asking is, why wouldn't we do that for education as well? It's just baffling to me, but maybe you guys have better ideas. Nobody in here is a state rep or senator, right? Yes? All right, so if you will take them, we will give you copies of these 3 books, because that is my target audience, is the people who are going to be out actually passing laws. Jody will hook you up. I want people to be asking these questions, like, why are we doing this way? I mean, the talk we mentioned that is going to become a book, spoiler alert, at the end, I'm basically talking about the way we do certain things. And I'm like, okay, if we were starting from scratch, knowing what we don't know now, doing what we can do now with the technology we have now, the way we're doing things is almost like everybody has horses, and we invent cars, and we say, okay, you can use a car, but you have to have a horse in it. And then somebody invents teleportation, like, okay, you can teleport, but you can only teleport if you're in a car with a horse in it, right? That's how all this stuff is working. We're just doing things because we're not thinking about why we're doing it or how we're doing it, or whether the way we did it in 1789 is the way we should, or even 1989 is the way we should be doing it now. So there's another joke that I often tell in talks, and that is, guy walks into the kitchen, sees his wife cut the end off a roast and throw it away. He's like, honey, why'd you throw away the end of the roast? And she's like, that's just how you cook a roast. That's what my mom always did. So they call up her mom, and they, Mom, why'd you cut the end off the roast? She's like, that's just how you cook a roast. That's what my mom always did. So they call up the grandmother and say, Grandma, why'd you always cut the end off the roast? She's like, because my roaster was too small. Okay? This is, I think 80% of politics and about 95% of education. And so I'm getting people to, I'm hoping to get people, I'd like to make money, but mostly I want to have people start looking at that pan and going, our pan is much bigger and much better than it used to be. Maybe we don't need to do things the way that we've been doing them for 100 or 200 years, just because that's what we know how to do. Well, thank you for coming.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized for distribution on Apple devices. Please be advised that CBS News has paused activity on unsafe space while it continues to assess security. Central bank digital currency is a safe and secure way to protect you from Sam Bankman-Fried. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.